Good afternoon, everybody, or morning or evening, wherever you're listening to this. Today, we have an exciting guest on from NuTech Synergies. It's somebody that I've worked with, work with. He's one of my great client partners for calibration marketing. And NuTech, and we'll go down into some of the weeds, is a US O&P market tech accelerator. So we help smaller technologies or technologies outside of the US market enter the US market through a variety of resources and things like that. So Mark will talk through a lot of that, as well as talk through some of the things that maybe some people are thinking about when they're entering this, the orthotics and prosthetics market, in terms of is there a golden ticket and things like that. So we'll go through some of those. And I invite anybody that has questions to ask them. We will try our best to answer them as we go. But before we jump in, a little bit about calibration marketing. I started it at the beginning of 2024. The goal really is to work with partners. Currently, it's primarily within the orthotics and prosthetics industry, and just helping them in the US market get more of their messaging out, provide support for those that may not be able to bring on a full-time marketing person, but they know that they need these resources. So you can check out calibration.marketing. It has a list of all of my various partners that I work with, some of the work that I've done, which mainly currently includes content, social media, things like that, as well as a bunch of really great documents that hopefully you find useful, that give you an idea of what the US O&P market looks like, some updates by the quarter, as well as what we're doing in the industry. So without further ado, I will invite Mark Ford from NuTech to join me. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Linda.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me to be on this. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. No, I think we had oh gosh, over a year ago at this point, you had joined me, Susie Ebersbach, and Carl Limborg to have a conversation about the larger kind of needs for a clinician. So that's kind of where it all started. But for those that did not listen into that webinar, share a little bit about yourself before we get into NuTech and everything that's done there. How did you end up in O&P? And,
Yeah,
I know it's a very short story.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not short. It was totally random. And I'm old enough to admit that I found my first job in O&P looking in the Sunday newspaper. That's where you used to look for jobs. And I had been a vice president for a regional kind of agricultural company. I grew up on a small farm in Ohio, still live in Ohio on a farm. With my wife and my daughter. And I wanted to get into the healthcare world. I wanted to get out of agriculture and get into healthcare. So I started looking in the Sunday newspapers. That's where you looked back those days, all the way back 1998. And and randomly found a company who was in prosthetics. I couldn't even pronounce the word, but they were looking for a marketing manager. And that company turned out to be Ohio Willowwood. It was a step down for me from where I'd been in my previous position, but it was a way. I knew when I transitioned to healthcare, it was going to have to be I was going to go lower on the ladder and work my way up. And so that role kind of was available. I got lucky enough to get hired for it. And I stayed with Willowwood for the next 9+ years in a variety of different roles with them that involved not just sales and marketing, which was kind of where I started off, but then I ended up overseeing all the customer clinical training, customer service, the international offices, international kind of fell in our team. And then was very involved with the acquisition that we did when Willowwood purchased TracerCAD. And so the last couple of years then, in my time with Willowwood, was spent very focused on the CAD, what we were doing from a CAD perspective. So I was very involved in the software development, the scanning developments that we did. We created a new carving unit and then worked really, really closely and oversaw the central fab operations at Willowwood. So
Okay.
Gave me a lot of really good background around lower limb prosthetics, because at that time, that's all that Willowwood did.
Mm.
And was a huge learning experience, and um, got me hooked. And you get hooked on the prosthetics and orthotics
You
bug,
do.
you don't want to leave.
Hmm.
So then I got approached by Touch Bionics. They were looking for somebody to run their North American operations. At that time, I was the third North American US employee. When I joined them, everything else was in Scotland. And I think at the time we had a total of 12 people when I joined. And then I was there for almost 5 years and helped them build the US team and um, really create the all the support and everything that we did from a sales, marketing, clinical support. We were, trying to teach people how to do partial hand. That was the first time powered partial hand
Mm.
was part of the equation
Right.
clinically.
Pro
So it was a great
digits.
experience. So did that for almost 5 years. Then I left there, went to work for OP Software. I
Okay.
had known Paul and Randy and John for years, working with them when I was at Ohio Willowwood. And so knew those guys, and they were looking for somebody to come in who could really help them drive the business development side of things for OP. So I stayed with OP for about 5 years, and there helped them from a business development standpoint. We created the consulting division. We called it Business Builders, where we would go in and really help people on a long-term basis with their practice operations and optimizing OP. And what do the numbers in OP tell you about your
Mm.
business, how to improve your business? And we built that part of the company from nothing. It didn't exist when I got there. And then ultimately we created what we called the OP Choice Network. And that
Okay.
ended up being a group of OP users who were focused on patient outcomes and trying to drive that to work together. Ultimately, the goal was to start to try to create a way to leverage patient outcomes and data with insurance contracting. So we started to do that and build that network. We ended up in 18 months, we had about 120 companies who had joined that
Wow.
network. So it grew fast. And that was a really exciting thing to be a part of,
Yeah.
was to help to develop something new, of a way to try to explain what O&P does to people who only see a claim come in, and they don't really understand what all goes behind it. So we spent a lot of time then working with insurance companies and starting to talk to medical directors and all those kind of things of how do we differentiate within O&P care to the insurance world.
Right.
We spent a lot of time doing that. I left there and actually then became the managing partner for a practice that had 9 locations. We had 5 locations that did traditional O&P, orthotics and prosthetics. And then we had 4 locations that were specifically just for upper limb prosthetics.
Okay.
So it was kind of going back to my Touch Bionics days, because I had
Yeah.
done in upper limb. And so that kind of was an interesting model for us, because it let us kind of diversify and have expertise in a couple different spaces, which was really cool. And so I got there and helped to grow that business and build it into something bigger with more clinicians and more patients. So that was a really interesting, fun process.
Mm.
And when I left there, I didn't really know what I was going to do. Had no grand plan. And none of these were kind of strategic decisions at the time. It wasn't, I'm going to learn upper limb prosthetics, then I'm going to learn or lower limb prosthetics, then upper limb prosthetics, then I'm going to go do software. And it wasn't that.
But O&P sucked you in.
Yeah, it sucked me in. And what I found through all of those was I got to know a lot of really cool people, a lot of really good people. And when it was time for me to do something new and different, and it felt like it was that time, then I'd start talking to friends and things would open up. And that's kind of how each one of those progressed. Not really having some great grand plan about it, but more of being open to what was out there and what would be interesting to try to do next.
What was so they were all kind of all of these experiences were a little bit in a startup-y type
Yeah,
place.
Willowwood obviously wasn't a startup. Willowwood
Sure.
was a 100-year-old company, so that one was very established.
Yeah.
But that one kind of built my foundation for O&P. That one, because they were established, we could walk into any practice in the country and they knew who we were. Okay,
Sure.
just say alpha liners. That's pretty simple.
Mhm.
And so what was interesting then was, how do we leverage what people know about us with alpha liners into other categories? And that was a lot of what I did, was help develop
Mm.
new products, and what did the market want, and try to, throughout that journey of all those places, one of my primary jobs, I think, has been to be the voice of the customer. And what is
Yeah.
it that they're looking for? What don't they have? What do they need? What are their problems? What are their pain points? And then try to figure out how you help them with those things. So yeah, it wasn't, each one of them had parts that were kind of related to a
Yeah.
startup, because a new product, even though it's in a company that has multiple products, a new product almost functions like a startup.
Right.
It has some of the same kind of characteristics. Touch Bionics was very much a startup. I mean, when I
Mhm.
joined the Touch Bionics, they did not have a US office. So we had to start, they had an office in Scotland. We didn't
Yeah.
have a US office. So we started from scratch. And that had good things and
That's
bad
an
things. Sometimes
undertaking.
when there's nothing that you have to fix, then that's good. That's one set of problems you don't have. But if there is nothing, then you have to build it. So that makes it
Mhm.
harder. OP was early stages, or was not early stages. They certainly had more established, but they weren't doing some of the things that they wanted to be able to do. And so
Mhm.
those things, in many ways, functioned as startup operations or divisions within OP. And some of those
Gotcha.
things we actually, they were separated as separate profit centers in the financials and all those kind of things. So we treated them very much like they were their own business. Business Builders, as the consulting business, had its own P&L.
Mm.
We budgeted, we planned, as that unit. And then when we started the Choice Network, it was kind of the same thing. That was an entirely new venture of us getting into some new things that were very different for OP.
Yeah.
So those function in a lot of ways like startups. So yeah, I'm kind of addicted to the idea of starting something new. That is
And
funny. My wife and I joke that my wife regularly says that I enjoy the chaos of new things.
mm.
I'm always looking for the next thing. What's interesting is she and I will be married next year, 35 years. So it doesn't go in
Yeah.
every time.
It doesn't always correlate. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't put perfect correlation in my life. From a
No, but
business perspective, it is very much, I look for what's the next new thing to try to build something. I really like the process of building something, getting it established, getting it going on its own, and then picking the next thing and kind of doing that. So,
well,
and
and
that,
it's
go
with
ahead.
NuTech, it's interesting too, because some of these, I mean, you were doing consulting prior to NuTech, right? And it just kind of grew out
Yeah.
of some of your conversations that you were having, saying, well, you're already doing this, that, and the other thing. Why not do it on a grander scale? And when enough
Yes.
people sing the same song, you're like, oh, well,
Yep.
maybe there's something to it.
Very
And
much so. Very much so. I did not get into consulting as some grand plan. It was
yeah,
just, it happened. It started kind of very organically.
same.
Former, a former boss of mine,
You gotta do something.
yeah, the former boss of mine called me, and I knew I was going to get a job, but the former boss of me, I had turned down 2 jobs already when I
Mm,
left the patient care stuff. And a former boss of mine called and said, "Hey, I've got this little company that needs some help. You ever think about doing any consulting?" And I was kind of like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that for a while."
mm,
They're still one of our clients with NuTech. So
mm,
um, it started off with one small company outside the U.S. who needed some help in how they were going to bring their product into the U.S. And kind of within a year, I had 7 clients, and I didn't do any marketing. I didn't do any. It was just word of mouth, and people
hmm.
who, the O&P world is a small,
Yeah.
very interconnected relationship group profession.
Hmm.
So it was just connections of people who knew me, who knew this company might need some help.
Yeah.
And as I started working with them, it became very clear to me they were at different phases in their product and company life cycle, but they all kind of needed the same things.
Hmm.
And they all were struggling because at the same time they needed clinical support, and they needed clinical training, and they needed reimbursement knowledge, and they needed sales and marketing help. But they're small companies and they don't have a ton of money. So you're
Right.
always trying to pick, well, which one of those things is the most important?
Right.
And the reality of it is, in O&P in the US, all of those things are important.
Yeah.
So, it's one of the huge advantages that the largest of the manufacturers have is they have the infrastructure to provide the support to practices and to clinicians to help make them successful. And when you're a small company and you're a young company, you can't afford that. There's now 12 people on our NuTech team. If you had to hire all 12 of those people and pay full-time salaries for those and benefits and taxes, you're talking about millions of dollars.
Right.
And those young companies don't have that. They're at the point where they're just starting to sell a product or not even sold the product yet, but want to be prepared to do this right. And so through that process of working with those companies, it kind of occurred to me, what if we shared those resources? What if we could build a team of experienced people who knew how to do these things, these different functions, and then if you had non-competing companies kind of in a cooperative mindset, could you share those resources so that early stage younger companies could have access to that level of expertise, the people who've been there and done it, who have the connections, who have the relationships with clinicians and practice owners and the other manufacturers and the distributors and all the different people who play in our world.
Right.
If you could have access to those kind of experienced resources, but you didn't have to pay the full price yourself, would there be a value to that? And so that's kind of what NuTech was all based around. And took a very big leap of faith and decided, yes, we think we can do this. Along the way, the opportunity came about for me to work with somebody that I worked with at Willowood, Jeff Danoon, who was the clinical director at Willowood. He and I had worked together for several years there, and he was looking at the idea of opening. He'd left Willowood and was doing clinical research at university, and he was looking at doing it. He approached me in the summer of 2022 and said, I'm looking at going out, leaving the university and doing a practice. Can you help me from the business side? And I was like, sure, let's talk about it. And the more we talked, it was kind of like, this could be pretty interesting, because part of my NuTech plan had been that phase 3 was where I really wanted to add, at that time, what I was calling a center of excellence. The idea there was these young companies to have the chance to do patient testing, product development support. Because when I was at Willowood and then at Touch Bionics, there was the most value that we got in the product development process was the interactions between the clinicians, the patients, and the development team, the engineers.
Right.
That's when things just click. You learn more, you get there faster. When those things are separated, or you don't have access to all three, it's difficult to make progress. And every new product, the first iteration is not what should go to market. You need to get the version 3 and version 4. But how do you do that when you have a very limited budget? You don't have access to a lot of patients. You're struggling to get the communication back from clinicians. I mean, I did that stuff, trying to get clinicians to help with who are in patient care every day, to help with product development. Everybody's got the best of intentions, but they're busy. So how do you get them to give you the input you need to help speed up the development process? So my goal had been in phase 3 was to add this center of excellence idea. Well, when Jeff and I talked, it was kind of like, okay, could we do that too now? And it was like, sure, let's start a new tech accelerator kind of company and an O&P patient care practice at the same time.
Easy peasy.
Yeah. So, if you jump it in, jump all the way. So jumped into the deep end and we did both of those things. And so now we're just past our first year. We introduced this new tech concept at the AOPA meeting in Indianapolis in 2023, and just went to AOPA in Charlotte, and we're still around and we're still paying our bills and trying to help people.
I forgot to bring out the champagne and bubbly for this conversation.
Yeah, I didn't really have the money for it this time. So maybe at the 5th year we'll do that. So,
no, I certainly don't come from the world of startups. I've had only one experience, and I understand the trials and tribulations and the especially coming from a larger organization, and then you kind of take this massive step back and you
Right.
think, oh my God, we like, and that's not in place. What about that? No, we haven't thought about that one. I guess when these new partners or potential partners or inquisitive parties come, what are some of the um, assumptions that are made, especially if they're outside the US, right? And are
Yeah.
seeing the US as this golden ticket to success. And perhaps they even have a successful product outside the country.
Yep.
What are some of the assumptions that are made that you kind of help talk them through and say, that's a great step eventually? But here are the things, kind of like what you said, that there's truly a need for all of these different facets of understanding the reimbursement and the L codes and insurance as a whole, and how and where that product stacks up, and have you done the right research, and have you partnered with clinics in the industry so that you can get buy-in from clinicians, being the biggest successor. What are some of the assumptions that you kind of have to say, that's great, but here the first things that you need to address? I think a
Yeah.
lot of times it's, we're doing good, we need to get this out there, we need sales.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everybody that I talk to, I should say everybody, probably 90, at least 90% of the people I talk
Mm,
to, they think they're ready to sell their product when they talk to us.
mm,
I would say less than half are really ready to sell their product, but they all believe they're that close.
yeah.
So that's the first thing you kind of got to start to um, make make clear to them what it is to have a product and a company that supports the product.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those levels of support that are expected now by clinicians throughout the country when you introduce something new to them. Those are pieces that very seldom anybody thinks about when
Yeah.
they're talking about getting into the O&P space. The vast majority of products in O&P today, from the major manufacturers to the smaller manufacturers, if you need a product loaner, you can get one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a super simple thing, but most young, bright CEOs who tend to be engineers, that's a lot of the people I talk
Yeah.
to, they haven't thought about what it is to really help a clinician to get confident about a new technology so that they're confident in helping a patient. So at the end of the day, that's what it is. Their view is, well, I've created a better mousetrap, and all I need you to do is to do some webinars and the orders will start to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really as far as they start to think about it. They will have also thought about that they don't understand the U.S. healthcare system if they're outside of the U.S. healthcare system, or even if they're in the U.S. healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
You can be in the U.S. and a citizen of the United States and have used our healthcare system and never heard the term L code.
Oh God, I never did.
Yep. So you show up, and so very often these, again, extremely bright, smarter than me CEOs, young CEOs, will say, "How long will it take you to get me an L code?" And I know right away you've gone on Google and you've Googled reimbursement for prosthetics or orthotics, and
Mm-hmm.
you've learned the term L code, what it takes to get an L code, the process, the trials, the tribulations. Don't get me wrong; it is actually better than it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but that whole process and what that process makes you want to consider. What is your pricing strategy based upon whether you fit into an existing code or you don't? If you don't fit into an existing code, are you going to be realistic about what it takes to help support the use of a miscellaneous code? What does that do to your pricing? Is your cost of goods going to allow you to fit into those boxes? A lot of times, young companies, early stage companies, they struggle with their cost of goods because they're doing so much stuff kind of one-off to prove
Mm-hmm.
the concept. They're past proof of concept phase, but not by much.
Sure. Yeah.
And to be honest, if you looked at kind of a more theoretical or deeper kind of product development process, they're not even through point of proof of concept because they haven't put it on very many patients at that point usually.
Right.
So they're at that early stage, and they're trying to figure out, well, okay, I've gotten a grant, or I've gotten some early seed money. I've gotten angel money from somebody who thought I had a great idea. And we're burning through that. So I need to start to create sales. And the reality of it is if you enter the market before you're really ready, you could see some sales if you get some, but they won't last. And if you're not there to support the customer who does those first sales, you'll have those first sales, but that doesn't mean that they've adopted your new idea. It means they tried it. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. If it doesn't work, it's very unlikely that the clinician is going to blame themselves. That's human nature.
Right.
And so they're going to blame the new technology. It's not ready. It's not good enough. It's too heavy. It's too light. It's too big. It's too small. It's too whatever.
Yeah.
But it'll be the problem of the new product. It won't be the problem of the clinician.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got to really think through then how you're going to help to take their initial interest in this product idea and turn that into they've adopted it and changed their patient care process to include this new technology, this new idea. So, that whole thought process of a little bit further than I think I'm ready to sell my product, because that's where we get a lot of interactions with folks. That's where getting into the weeds of how you actually, the steps you're going to have to take to commercialize this successfully. That's the learning process. You kind of got to bring these young companies through.
Yeah. And even if you can assume that, you can assume two things. One is that the product really is viable for the US market, but depending on what it is, you still, again, depending on where it falls, there are also some nuances of testing that go along with it and getting those early market adopters and getting that feedback. Or perhaps the assumption is that the product is ready, but when you go and start to have those initial conversations, whether they are through the help of the NuTech, kind of our arms from a clinician or sales perspective, whatever they are, or that technology and that partner goes out on their own to seek this feedback and then realize, oh my God, okay, well, maybe it worked in wherever, but here we need to make these adjustments. And now the tremendous amount of work that goes into figuring out, well, what are those things and who's going to do it and how are we going to do that testing and who are we going to work with and partner with from a clinician standpoint, also in the industry, to kind of get their buy-in. It's definitely an interesting dance to try to figure out where on that spectrum does this new technology fall and what kind of support is actually needed. And so obviously that's a lot of what, like you said earlier and touched on it in terms of the support that NuTech provides. There is this wide range of skill sets, and it's not just people that have kind of fallen into this at this point. It's people that have been around the various blocks and have seen a lot of things, have been a part of a variety of startups, have worked in a variety of well-known clinics around the nation. And so they have those relationships, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is that people trust these folks. And so that sometimes is too often taken for granted of, well, we're new and hip and cool. We can get in there because we've got a cool thing. Like you said, we've built it. They will come. Yeah.
And, you're balancing for those new companies that they've created something new and they have inherent belief in it because they built it. It's their baby. Right. And as a father of two, I can tell you, it's not dissimilar to your children in that you believe your child is going to do amazing things, and as they grow, they may or may not do as well in some areas as they do in others. And so being real about that is really important as you think about the product. And one of the best ways to kind of, as quick as possible, learn about your product is to have good, we call them early adopter practices, who we know really well. We have very deep ties with those folks. And we can walk in and say, hey, we'd like you to try this on 5 patients. And they believe us because we've known them. if you're not have been in the field like our team has, and you contact a practice and you call one of the owners out of the blue and say, hey, I'm Mark Ford, I'm with this new company, we have this new technology, we'd like you to try it. Or I can go to dinner with one of these guys who I've known for 25 years and talk to them about their family and their kids, and I've known them forever, and along the way say, hey, we've got this new product that we really are trying to get some feedback on, would like to try it, are you interested? It's an entirely different relationship,
right?
And so it leads to a commitment to those kind of things, because they're working with somebody they know and that they have some level of trust with.
Right.
They know we're going to make it right if there are any problems. They know that we're going to be there to support them if there are any problems. And so that makes the decision to try something new way less risky. If they've never heard of you before, you're a much higher risk for them. And one of the things that always young companies forget is this patient care process anywhere in healthcare, but I think it's even deeper in O&P, especially on the prosthetic side, and I think orthotics as well, because there's so many patients who practice sees orthotically and prosthetically for a decade. That means those people are trusting those healthcare workers year in and year out with their care.
Yeah.
That's a high bar. So if I'm going to bring something new to that person who has trusted me for 10 years, it better be freaking good, because they have a level of confidence and trust in me that you're going to do the best thing for them clinically. So the bar that you're trying to clear as a new company is, does my product do something more than what that clinician is already doing, has already been successful and been helpful to the patient? If you can't clear that bar, why would the clinician try something new?
Yeah.
So it's a challenge there. And by having our experience and our relationships, we help them, those early adopter practices in particular, to feel really comfortable with the idea of trying that new, because they know us. They don't have to know they know us as being there to help them and support them. And that really helps to get you in the door with something that's brand new.
Yeah. And I think, we certainly need that new, those new technologies that come out of everywhere else outside of the US, and sometimes within the US as well. And it's just a great engineered product, but it's okay, and then what?
Yeah.
And then what drive the industry?
Yeah. And then what, not only is the product introduction, but then, once you introduce the product, there's a whole nother set of downstream questions you got to answer. We hit on a little bit ago. How are you going to handle loaners? How are you going to handle repairs? How are you going to handle growth in your production? I've been involved with products where we thought it was going to be just an okay product at a company, and the next thing you know, it explodes. And in an established company, scaling up production doesn't happen in a minute. If you're a brand new company without the resources that I've had at some other companies, and now you get interest and you don't manage that flow of how your product grows within the market, and that can be managed. If you don't manage that, and your demand goes up really fast and your production can't keep up, and now you're an unreliable supplier because you can't deliver for the next 7 weeks, you've shot yourself in the foot. So there's a variety of different factors that kind of, to make this a successful product 18 months after you introduce it, that's a whole nother set of questions you got to kind of think through. I tell all the new companies that we deal with, O&P is slow to change and slow then to leave what they've decided is good. And so when you come to your first national meeting, there will be lots of clinicians who will walk by and say, oh, that's really cool. And when you go to your second national meeting, they'll walk by and say, yeah, I thought I saw that before. And when they come to the third national meeting, which is where I think things actually start to change within our field, then they want to talk and they want to understand it.
Because you're still around.
You're still there. That means that you're going to be there. What's the warranty on most of our products? 2 to 3 years. You're going to be around in 3 years? if I buy this from you today, are you going to be here in 3 years? Because I put it on a patient, and you're supposed to be there to take care of that product if there's a problem for 3 years. Going to be
Right.
around?
Yeah. No, we're not even talking about clinical support. And obviously, if there are if there are issues that come up, or just things will inevitably break and need updates, how is that being dealt with, and
Yep.
can you keep up with that? And then if there needs to be a recall, God forbid, like what happens then? And so, yeah, definitely a lot of nuance uh, that happens in just entering the market, and within those first 2 to 3 years, when the assumption should be that all things will probably go wrong. So how can you
Right.
avoid them? But it's hard selling uh, and quantifying relationships, right? So
Yes.
that's, I think that's the big challenge, just like it is for the technology partners, it is for somebody like NuTech. We've been around the block. We know, we understand, but it's tough to, just like in marketing, it's tough to quantify things and say, well, it's all part of a slow burn, and it's
Right.
eventually going to take off.
Yep.
And so it's just that, uh, you know, the years of experience and the personnel, I think, certainly speaks volumes.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're trying hard to do at NuTech is how do we find these new ideas earlier in their product
Mm,
life cycle? Because one of the mistakes that we've seen happen several times to early stage companies is they start off with a plan and they get to us when they think they're ready. And again, NuTech's been around for a year, so
mhm.
this is new to the world. So
Yeah,
getting the message out to everybody is not possible.
right.
But some of the companies that we have had as clients are they get to us and they think their product's ready. And we've pretty quickly through our use of the product at our clinic in Indianapolis, and as well as then our feedback from our early adopter practices who try it, we find out that there's some issues with that. And one of the challenges that really comes up is oftentimes those companies have been funded to get to that point,
Mm,
and they are on the last bit of their current funding.
yeah.
And we've seen in the last 18 months, those equity capital investment kind of groups, and globally, that funding in new early stage companies has dropped dramatically in the last 2 years.
Mm,
um, Mostly due to nothing at all related to the prosthetics and orthotics industry, but related to what's going on globally
yeah.
economically. So, what happens is those companies have created something that could be really good. It could be an early version that has got lots of potential, but if you then don't have the money, the funds to get to that next phase, it can be a real challenge for you. And that's why for us, we're trying to get to people earlier so that they can use some of
Yeah.
our experience to say, don't blow everything in the first 2 years you get your funding, thinking at the end of 2 years you're going to be selling a lot of product.
Right.
How do you be realistic about this with your investors, whether that money is coming from government grants or whether that money is coming from an equity investor, an angel investor? It doesn't matter. How do you be realistic about what this process kind of really looks like and what it's going to
Mhm.
cost
Yeah.
you? One of the advantages of working with NuTech is, I mentioned it earlier too, was you know the cost to have that infrastructure yourself is prohibitive for most young companies. But when you work with us, you're paying a fraction. You're
Yeah.
paying, depending upon the number of companies that we have, we split those costs between those companies. So right now we have 7 companies. So when our folks travel, those costs get shared amongst the companies who we represented on
Mhm.
that particular event.
Yeah.
So it's a way to start to get that exposure, to start to get those connections, to start to know who to talk to, at a cost that's dramatically less than what you would have. The alternative that we've seen is many times those companies will hire a sales manager. They think, okay, I'm going to hire a U.S. director of sales.
Mhm.
Um, and that's great. If you can find the right person who has the O&P background, who is experienced and has the connections, that person's probably, by the time you pay their salary, their commissions, and their travel, is going to cost you $150,000 to $175,000 a year.
Oh yeah.
So you can work with NuTech and be in that same kind of ballpark and have 12 people thinking about your product every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because we're splitting those costs and sharing those costs across a number of different non-competing companies.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's a good point too. I think as we kind of wrap things up here, I want to make sure that we also hit on the fact, A, that they are non-competing partners,
Yep.
And B, that when you're going into some of these clinics with one product, but you have a full briefcase of others, you may not be going into that clinic with one of those other products because you may think it's not the right place, but because of those relationships, you're just going to have a lovely conversation and kind of start to roll other things out, and you never know what that's going to lead to.
Yep.
And so it allows just for more exposure, more conversations to take place, and more touch points of like you said, the first time you're like, nah, okay, we don't deal in that. But eventually, maybe by the third or whatever time, they say, still kind of maybe sort of interested, but I know a guy. And at least you start to have those. So what are, just so for folks listening in, what are those branches that NuTech offers in terms of support? There's clinical, and if you could just, talk through some of that.
So it starts with the patient product testing and the product development assistance, kind of where they start with that. As we, some companies take advantage of that. Some companies, as I said, are further along in that and they don't need it. And then the range of stuff that we do, starts with a very heavy focus on education. We do a ton of in-facility training. We also do online trainings with all of our tech partners. We work to establish CEU courses with them so that we have training curriculums built. Our belief is that if our clinicians go in and spend the time at a practice with the practice's patients in their facility, helping them to try and learn a new technology, the retention rate goes through the roof compared to a webinar. It's not that I don't like webinars. I think webinars have a great place and we do them.
Yeah.
They're a great way to find out the folks who are interested in a topic, but I've never seen a clinician change his patient care protocol based upon a webinar.
Yeah.
They've got to see it and touch it and feel it and get over that learning curve, no matter how big that might be, to really feel confident and comfortable providing that product to a patient. And so we have a wide range of different clinical training, clinical support. We also have salespeople that are out in the field, trying to help our clinicians to line up these trainings, trying to find out the folks who are interested in new technologies, building the relationships deeper. We have marketing. Linda helps us a lot with marketing. We do a variety of different things marketing-wise, from e-blast newsletters, social media. We do a large number of trade shows.
Yeah.
Again, that's a collaborative effort where we're sharing costs amongst our technology partners. This year we did 12 state meetings. Next year we'll probably do 15 or 16 state meetings, the 2 national meetings. We do combined displays where all of our tech partners are together. That allows us to oftentimes move the display to the front of the hall instead of the back of the hall.
And it draws in different people again. It's those different conversations. You're talking about that thing, but what is that?
Yep. Yeah. So all of those things kind of come together for us to provide that support from a marketing side. And then we have the reimbursement support, where we help people everywhere from what's just the strategy around where your product can fit, what are the options. We have folks who a lot of experience in understanding codes, coding. A number of our team members have been involved in submitting successful new L code applications. We've done that on numerous occasions for folks, so we understand the process really well. All the way then to, okay, let's talk about PDAC. What are we going to do from a product review standpoint from PDAC? How do we make sure that we're checking all the boxes that we think PDAC is going to be looking at for this particular application? So that whole reimbursement strategy, we spend a lot of time with companies trying to work through that, make sure that we've got that prepared well and thought through. And again, as that impacts what your pricing choices are. If you're going to need to fit into a box at a certain fixed reimbursement amount, then you can do the math back. Am I going to sell through distributors, or am I going to sell directly? If I'm going to sell through distributors, there's a discount that's involved there. If I'm going to work with NuTech, there's a cost that's involved there. And then the practice is going to need to make their margin. So where does that get me to my pricing? And are my cost of goods going to allow me to have enough margin? That whole process we work through with people every month.
Yeah.
It's just kind of what we know, and we know how those steps need to be taken in order for the reimbursement to work for everybody. That's what you're trying to find. How do we make a reimbursement number work for a new technology? We're not opposed to using miscellaneous codes if that's what we need to do. If you've got something that's so dramatically different, we can do that. You need to make sure in today's world that the miscellaneous code is really justified. Getting paid practices, it's much harder for practices to get paid on miscellaneous codes these days. That is a significant change over the last 5 to 7 years. And so if you're going to have something that's going to be in a 9.9 code, you better have a really good explanation as to why. Fortunately, we work with some companies who have some very different things and some very different things coming, out over the next year. That a 9.9 code probably makes a lot of sense for, but that's not just a slam dunk. Just because you don't think you fit into the box, automatically you can do a 9.9 code and everybody's going to be happy. Nope, the world doesn't work like that. Yeah, those are the kind of the range of expertise that we have from years and years of experience.
Yeah. And just like a comment that came in, people can find you everywhere. We have somebody asking for you to reach out to them to talk about one of these partners. So,
but I know Tom a long time, so I'm happy to do it.
There you go. That's all we should have done. We should just ask somebody to jump in and say, hey, I know this guy.
Yep. Unfortunately, people have known me for too long for some of them.
But they trust in you, so it works out. But no, thank you for joining me today. I knew that it would be a nice kind of informative and general conversation that helps, whether you've been in the market or you are entering or wherever that may be. And maybe it's somebody that's been around, but it's a team of like 2 and you don't know where to spin next. And so, everybody whoever's listening in can find out more on nutechsyn.com. We have a list of our technology partners on there in the little hamburger sandwich menu. You can find more out. You can find out more about us, contact us on there. And Mark's always there to answer a question. So
happy to.
So before we say goodbye, our next webinar is on October 16th. So about 2 weeks from today. And we'll do a little bit of a series with a couple of clinics with a special guest mixed in there and talk about, again, same thing of somebody that's been around for a year, somebody that's just starting out, and then somebody that's been around for 70 years like Dankmeyer. So it's interesting for me to see and just learn about all of these different nuances, because everybody's got a different story to tell and obviously hopes to get to that 70-year mark. But there's a lot of more independent clinics are certainly needed. So it's definitely a good thing to have these 2 folks from Cavella and Wright Orthotics and Prosthetics on. So we'll be having those conversations over the next month or so. But Mark, thank you so much. And everybody, like I said, can find out more on nutechsyn.com or reach out to Mark on LinkedIn and ask any questions that they have. So
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay.